and just connect. So, good evening, everybody. This is Karen Dodd from Wise Women Weekdays, and we've got a very interesting couple of gentlemen to chat with tonight. We've already spoken to Nicholas Martin on previous occasions. Nicholas, hello, how are you?
Very well, thanks very much, Karen. Fighting fit.
Fighting fit, that's what I like to hear. So we're going to be chatting to you first of all, and then we also have a lovely gentleman all the way from the other side of the pond. We have Scott McColough. Hello, Scott, how are you tonight or today?
I'm doing well. It's
Doing
good
well,
to be
super.
talking back to the folks there again.
Oh, that's lovely. It's lovely to have you. Really, it's very lovely to have you. So, Nicholas, would you like to just give us a little bit about, a backstory about yourself briefly and why we're going to have this conversation this evening or this afternoon if you're in Texas?
Certainly. I do two things really at the moment. One is I'm a local councillor and chairman of my local parish council, and I did that because I very much want to support democracy at the local level. And secondly, with some other people, I set up an organisation called Adult Child Health and Environmental Support, ACHES, Aching for a Better Society, and drawing attention of the British people to the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. And really, we wanted to emulate what Robert Kennedy did with his organization, Children's Health Defense in America, and we very much respect what he's done. And of course, we're honored to have Scott, who has worked closely with him in the past, and Scott was lead counsel for CHD in America. And what I wanted to do today was just talk about two particular legal situations in the UK, which are related to electromagnetic radiation. And electromagnetic radiation means, in our sense, things like Wi-Fi, smartphones, these, what in America they call cell towers, what we call telecom masts, and the effect of that on human consciousness and human physiology. And I was very pleased to read a report from Robert Kennedy, who is now in the American government, and just one key sentence from his recent report. The report identifies electromagnetic radiation from wireless technologies as a chronic environmental toxin alongside pesticides, plastics, and air pollutants, which means we're moving into an era when it's recognized now that this is a danger to humanity. And it reminds me a bit of the days when asbestos was said by governments to be perfectly safe. And it was awkward people like Scott and myself. And funny enough, we've got a colleague in AICS who supports AICS, who was an asbestos protester, telling the truth about asbestos. And they treated him very badly. He was by his employer, because he told the truth, his employer treated him very badly. But it's necessary to tell the truth at all costs. And what has happened in England is, I'll start with the optimistic case. What happened is that the British government, locally and nationally, relies on something called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which sets certain standards, namely 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, as an element whereby if you go above that, the body will heat up and it's not safe. Now, first of all, this is an inaccurate metric because the deleterious effects are not heating, they're non-thermal. So that's point number one. But putting that aside, a recent judgment was made that people with pacemakers and metal implants and metal devices are outside the scope of ICNIRP, because ICNIRP says it can't deal with such people because it's beyond their scope. And the judgment was that people who live proximal to such a mast need to be taken care of because they're outside the ICNIRP guidance. Now, that's quite an astounding judgment and is a very good judgment. And funny enough, a local authority tried to repeal that judgment in the Court of Appeal, but the Court of Appeal refused it and dismissed it and said it remains on the books. Now, the ramifications are quite extraordinary because it means that we've got loads of telecom masts all around the UK and loads of people living near them who have pacemakers. And it's not only people with pacemakers, they put nanoparticles, nanoparticles in dental anesthetics, in flu injections, in many other injections. And people have metal fillings and metal hip replacements. So it means a huge number of people are required to be protected under the decision in the appeal court. So that's a very good decision. A very bad decision relates to what is happening in London, where Transport for London, which is headed up by the Mayor of London, a man, by the way, that Mr. Trump calls a terrible man, as you probably remember, this Mayor of London, who is chairman of Transport for London, has allowed through Transport for London UNEX equipment to be installed. Now, the UNEX equipment consists of 3 radar devices and 1 infrared device. And these beam radiation at people unwittingly at traffic light junctions. And the infrared device contains laser diodes, which are 800 milliwatts per diode, and you've got 24 of them in what's known as a Fabry-Perot structure. And 24 times 800 means that it's 19,200 times the so-called government safe level. Now, this is quite extraordinary. And the government's own paper, ICNIRP, which they rely on, says that concentrated infrared light damages the human eyesight. So, and we know from military records that radar causes cancer. And it's a cumulative effect, such as, when the dentist gives you an X-ray, he goes out of the room because if he has too many short bursts of radiation, he will get cancer based on a cumulative result. Now, this is quite an extraordinary situation that should be occurring in London. And the other thing, this is a 5G technology, and we define 5G as a scanning and backhaul technology, and digital ID requires 5G. Now, this scanning technology in London, which is 5G, does what's called mesoscopic surveillance. That's a term that I wasn't familiar with, and I had to look it up, but it means at the nano level. So it's going in at the molecular level, and it's reading people's biometrics, and those biometrics will be contained in their digital ID. So the scanning device will recognize a person, and then they can track that person around wherever they go in London, not track their mobile, but track the person themselves, and at the same time give them doses of radiation, which we know are very harmful. Now, the case came about in the tribunal of the Information Commissioner's Office, and the Freedom of Information request submitted asked Transport for London, how many radar devices have they installed in London? When the case came for review, they said they concentrated the case on ANPR cameras, automatic number plate recognition cameras. And they said their equipment doesn't have radar devices or LiDAR, which is laser diode technology, and that it's just an ANPR camera. But we know that certain people chopped down the devices because they didn't like the ULEZ, which is the ultra low emission zone, and paying a penalty for going in there. They didn't know about the equipment, they just chopped it down and made it available for analysis. And through that analysis, we saw laser warning devices in the equipment in relation to the laser diodes, and we saw the phased array radar devices, and it was displayed. All this information, photographs were put into the court hearing, yet the judgment was they only have ANPR technology. And the case will be appealed in the upper tribunal, and if they refuse leave to take it there, it will go to the High Court, then to the appeal court, and then to the Supreme Court if necessary. And that should garner the opportunity to make all this known to the public, because it's public awareness which is extremely potent.
Yeah.
And really, that's what's going on. I just
thank you, Nicholas, for that. That was introduction plus.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. And so let's now introduce, or bring Scott in. Hi, Scott McColough. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
You're doing
Good to
fine.
see everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, as I said, again, for joining us. What is the connection then? Because you're over in the States in Texas, and Nicholas and I are in the UK. What is the connection? What is going on here? Because I know you've worked for Bobby Kennedy. I think you're the leading lawyer in a certain case. But then Nicholas has obviously reached out to you because of what's happening over here. Can you give us a little bit of a backstory about what's happening and this involvement and the connection? Why should we be connected? What's happening in America and what's happening in England?
Because the world is a giant interconnected networks of networks. And they are all driven by the same kind of technology. Almost all that what Nicholas has talked about and some of the things he has not talked about rely on EMR to function. They also rely on intelligence within the network to do the things that they do to meet their design purpose. What many people don't understand is, one, the quantity of exposure that they have. And I'm going to get into a little bit more background in a minute, but these are some really essential points. The providers and those who justify this technology, I want to talk about one little thing, like you got sliced in your court case. Oh no, it's only a camera. Well, but along with the camera is this other thing that's radar, which is in the 24 gigahertz range and in the 13.4 gigahertz range. But behind that is a 5G network that probably is operating on many other different frequency ranges. And wherever you look, you'll see an antenna like these behind me, and then small ones on every light post. And there's all this radiating equipment in the environment today. Now, science has known for a very long time, it's right there in the engineering principles that drive all of this stuff, that it's not just one little exposure that causes harm. It's the cumulative and simultaneous exposure that really leads to harm. And that harm can be for more than just whether it burns your skin. Now, yes, we do need to talk about things like LIDAR, light in the higher spectrum, the light spectrum, as perhaps distinguished from radar spectrum or the spectrum used for 5G networks. But as bodies, what we are responding to is the total amount of exposure, the peak exposure, the simultaneous exposure, and then exposure throughout your life. That's where the health concerns are. Some of the stuff in the higher ranges are, particularly bad for things like your eyes. And that's just because of the way that those frequencies and the modulation techniques for them work. But everybody just needs to understand you're living in a sea of EMR right now that was not present as we were evolving as human beings. Now, let me get back to a little bit more background. In 1968, our Congress passed the Radiation Control for Health and Safety Act. And in it, Congress declared that electronic products, which is what we're talking about here, things with integrated circuits that emit electromagnetic radiation, are dangerous. It recognized that in 1968. And it provided for a system of program and control. Sadly, however, that's never really been activated. Instead, for some reason over here on this side of the pond, all of the control over health and safety and on exposures and emissions has been sent over to the FCC rather than to Health and Human Services, where Congress said it belonged in 1968. The most important point, though, is we've known since the 60s how bad this stuff can be and how important it is to limit and control. A little bit of background. I've been doing telecommunications and internet work even before there was an internet. I used to represent the industry here for 40 years. And, back then, I was one of the ones, advocating the use of this technology. I was an evangelist for it. And when I went to teach in engineering schools on how telecommunications is regulated, and I got to the wireless part, I would say the same thing as many of the engineers would say. Oh, it's not harmful unless it burns your skin. Well, let's fast forward to 2019. I get a phone call from somebody working for Bobby Kennedy at Children's Health Defense. And they say, we've got an FCC case and we're looking for somebody to take an appeal to the Court of Appeals. The FCC has said it doesn't need to look at its exposure guidelines. And I went, well, I think their exposure guidelines are great, but, write me a check. I'll take the case. Then when I started to look at the case and look at the evidence that had been put in that case, I realized that everything I knew was wrong. Since that time, I've stayed with Children's Health Defense. I'm their chief litigating counsel. And what we do now is we advocate in Congress and before the courts and at the FCC and in other agencies for a true recognition of the threats from this technology, not only from the health and environmental piece, but also from the surveillance and privacy concerns. The threats to this kind of technology. I mean, look, I have a cell phone too, okay? I use the technology. But what is missing from all of this has always been an understanding, recognition, and accounting for the downsides to it. So what we do is we acknowledge, yes, this stuff provides benefits. It's convenient, to be sure. But it also has a downside, and here's the 5-minute version of it. So you can see in my background screen what we do. We have two major initiatives. One is called the Stop 5G Initiative. Whenever somebody in a local community gets wind that they're wanting to put a cell tower right in their backyard, we help them get organized to present a case to, have some input on placement and the conditions for it. Does it belong in this place? Maybe it needs to go down the street. Maybe we don't need it at all. So we help local communities mount a fight so that their presence is known. Their concerns are communicated to their local authorities. We've got another initiative. You can see it here on the other side, 704 No More. Those are kind of some magic words. It references a section in a congressional bill from 1996. But what it basically says is that local jurisdictions cannot regulate cell tower placement on the basis of the environmental effects. We believe that's unconstitutional, and we're going to try to get it changed. So that's kind of what we do. Let's bring it home to y'all. You mentioned your two cases, and especially the one in London. Yes, of course you have to be concerned about the radar, and yes, of course you have to be concerned about the LiDAR. But you also need to understand that this is part of an entire system that is designed for control purposes. After all, it's a traffic control system. Who's the traffic? You are. This is about controlling you. This is about restricting your choices, restricting your autonomy, sucking data about you, feeding it into a gigantic system where all the information that is gathered is stored, processed, and used against your interests. And now with artificial intelligence, they can do things and make decisions in close to real time. Yes, as you travel through London, you become a particle in their meso system. And they track you around. There's a little bubble up above you or your car where it says, this is so-and-so. And they track you through each location and they gather data about it. Before too long, if you happen to venture somewhere where they think you might not ought to be, or if you're doing something, or if you're talking on the phone and saying something that they don't like, or maybe intending to make a purchase that they don't approve, they can use all of this data to lock the door that you want to walk into at a store, to turn off your digital money so that you can't make that process, to turn off your electric vehicle or take control of it and send you back to your zone. This is what you are looking at. This is what this technology threatens. And trust me, I know networks. Okay, I've helped design them. I understand the protocols, and everything is built in now. All they need to do is flip a switch, and they're about to do that.
Scott, let me ask you this, because it's happening already. I've been affected, like sending money or transferring money or booking accommodation. And over here now we've got the digital ID, you know, that they're saying it's going to come into force. I think a lot of people think that we're going to be offered a digital ID, but it's actually happening already around the back door. If you try and renew your passport, your driving license or something like that, you have to sign up and get face, you know, your live face against some existing photograph that you've already get. So it's actually happening here. A big question, two big questions: why and who? Why are they doing it, and who are they?
First of all, digital ID is a terrible idea because it's just something that's going to go into the control grid. But everybody has to understand, you really do already have a digital ID. If you're carrying a phone, okay,
Yeah.
the number that's associated with your phone, the you know, the IP number, that phone becomes a surrogate for you. It is effectively you. And so they can already identify you. Now, what does the digital ID do? Well, first of all, it's going to reside in your phone. Okay. They got to have a network to make that work. What does it do is it ties it all together and probably in the blockchain so that there is an immutable record that is made somewhere that can then be retrieved and used as desired for whatever purpose is they want to use it for. Now, who's the who? Well, I can tell you, it's not somebody who's interested in a democratic process. It's probably somebody who thinks there's too many of us and we need to be put in a pen and exterminated in very large part.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't exterminate us, then they're going to lock us in and keep us under control and reserve all the good stuff for themselves. It is a global elite. That's who it is.
So if you've been working with Bobby Kennedy and now Bobby Kennedy is working with Mr. Trump, they, you know, he's got some power and he's obviously aware, both of, you know, these guys have got some power and know what's going on. What's their say on it?
Well, I can assure you Bobby Kennedy is aware of all these issues. And he is trying to work within the system to instill some modicum of pushback. Certainly, he wants much deeper look at and control of the health and environmental effects of this technology. But he is also trying to build into the system assurances that people will be able to retain their autonomy. That while we can have our modern conveniences, it's not going to be used for something like a control grid. He wants to maintain individuality and respect the individual's role in all of society. That's always been, and of course, obviously, children are the most important.
Yeah.
But, you know, his voice inside the government is very good to have. Now, is he going to win the day? I don't know. He's got to get in a room with a bunch of other people inside the government. And, you know,
yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah.
Well, President Trump has his own ideas. I mean, his family's got a mobile reseller company. So, you know, what's really more important than anything else, though, is having a voice in the room trying to explain, you know, yes, this stuff is good. It can be helpful, but we need to impose some constraints on it. We need to recognize the downsides. We need to maintain privacy and autonomy. And that's what his voice is for. And that's why it's so valuable.
And that is so crucial, because once, you know, we're in the system, I don't know if we can get out. That's the thing. If we're all signed up to this, is there any way out? Nicholas, what do you have to say? You're
Well,
making noises down there.
I'm extremely optimistic. I think humanity is poised at a turning point in human consciousness. And I have tremendous respect for Scott, and he's been very gracious to come on some of our AIX events in the past when we did them in London. He was beamed in on Zoom into the hall, and he went down extremely well. I mean, he was very, very much appreciated. But this is a piece of paper from the White House, and it says, study the scope of childhood chronic disease crisis and any potential contributing causes, including the American diet, absorption of toxic material, medical treatments, lifestyle, environmental factors, government policies, food production techniques, electromagnetic radiation. Now, that's come from the White House. Next point is Bobby Kennedy. I always call him Robert Kennedy, but some people call him Bobby. RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr., stands by comments that Wi-Fi causes cancer, reported by the news. And they asked him to withdraw that statement, and he refused. And then, of course, we've got that statement by Maha, Make America Healthy Again. The report identifies electromagnetic radiation from wireless technologies as a chronic environmental toxin. Now, that comes from the government of the most powerful country in the world. And I think it opens up doors here in the UK, and I cite these documents regularly, and I think what's going on in America is leading the way to a lot of information coming out before the public. And the reason I'm optimistic, if you think of two individuals, you've had His Royal Highness Prince Andrew has now been effectively removed from the so-called royal family because of Epstein. Now, the public were relatively relaxed about it in Britain until it came out that he'd sent this email to Epstein saying, you know, we're all good friends, or words to that effect. So now he's been banished, not by the British government or even the royal family, but just awareness by the British public. And the same thing happened to the British ambassador to America, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson. He was quite happily talking to Donald Trump in the White House, a major player in the British government as British ambassador to America. And what happened? Removed almost overnight, as soon as it came out about his relationship with Epstein. Again, not by the government and not by the Foreign Office. It was purely because the British public became aware. Now, once the British public become aware of all the things that Scott has quite rightly pointed out, the British government, the British public will demand the legal removal of things like this apparatus in London. And it's going in, apparently, in Birmingham, Leeds, Newcastle, Manchester, Bristol, similar technology. But because the public don't know about it, they can get away with it. But once the Peter Mandelson effect comes in, the British public find out the truth. That's the end of that technology. And because Ofcom, which is the British equivalent of America's FCC, regulate both the media and the 5G rollout, people like me are prevented from telling the public through the mass media, BBC and all the rest, even GB News. But thank heavens for people like you, Karen. We can express the truth and communicate it to the people. And this is why I have tremendous respect for Scott, because he won this landmark case in America against the FCC, and all the work he's doing with about 704 No More is inevitably having an effect in American society. And we hope to mirror that type of effect in the UK with what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm very optimistic.
I'm optimistic as well because it is an energy thing. Like you say, we're going through a massive change in humanity on an energy scale, aren't we? Like you're talking about the quantum aspect of what's happening and if we're ascending, if we're becoming nicer people. So you've got that as energy beings, because we are all energy beings. And we're talking here about energy, electromagnetic fields, which are negative. So, you've got this balance, haven't you? And which one's kind of going to win. And I hear what you're saying about the public speaking out if they get the information. And I am doing my bit, but I know quite often when I have guests on and we have these chats, I call them chats rather than interviews, they are getting removed if somebody says the wrong thing, which is very infuriating. So we have to be very mindful of how we get this information across. But okay, the public might stand up and protest and fill in petitions and stuff like that, but all these politicians are puppets, aren't they? So you might get rid of, Mendelssohn or all these people that they and there's a lot of them that have just gone in the Labour government. Is quite interesting. The housing, all these people that are being removed or changed, they're just being another puppet. So,
but I don't think it's necessary for the British public to get up and protest. All it is the British public become aware. And it's like a disinfectant that spreads across the whole of society, cleaning up all the organs of state. At the moment, our judges, some of the judges, are making judgments which are clearly untruthful. And the British public are not aware about it. But once they become aware, they don't have to knock on the judge's door and say, hello, mate, become truthful. Just the awareness of the iniquity of their decisions, like we've seen in London, changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
Nobody went to Peter Mandelson and said, you've got to resign. He resigned automatically as soon as it came out in the mass media that what he'd been up to.
Yeah.
And that's the same with what we're doing. Once the people realize that's the end of the whole setup, they can only get away with it in a clandestine approach and by telling lies like the radiation, as long as it doesn't heat you up, is perfectly safe. And we know that the damaging effects are non-heating, non-thermal. So once the people get that, that's a huge step forward. And as I say, more and more information is coming out now. And I do think America is leading the way in many, many fields of, this change in perception. And of course, it's tremendous that Robert Kennedy is Health and Human Services.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is so much corruption going on, and it is all over the world.
Yes.
And one thing, you and I, Nicholas, we had this little chat the other day, and I just brought forward, and I could have this wrong, so Scott, correct me if I am wrong, but I thought when Bobby Kennedy was chosen to be in the government, which we all thought, yay, fantastic, we've got a good guy in there. But then they were talking about creating a vaccination to cure cancer and putting a lot of money in to cure cancer through some inoculation. Is that true? Did that happen? Or are they talking about it? Again, we've got to be careful here, I say what we say, because they might take it off.
There's words and then there's principles. Okay, we all know that those shots that were rolled out a couple of years ago were not really vaccinations. Okay, that was not a vaccine. Bobby has always said he's not against vaccine. He just wants one, real science conducted on it, preferably before rollout. Okay. And two, honest disclosure of the risks so that three, people can make an individual choice as to whether to take it. So we have to be careful about our words. Is he in favor of looking at the potential of a vaccine for cancer? I hope he is, so long as it is tested and safe and there is full disclosure of the risks and potential benefits, and then each individual has the choice whether to take it. Those are the things that are important.
Yeah. Having a choice. I think that's what put the fear of God into everybody, wasn't it? Because they were talking about it mandatory, over in 2020 when all this thing kicked off. And mandatory is again, it's a choice, isn't it? The word mandatory isn't saying we're forcing you to do it. It's kind of a strong suggestion. But Yeah, we have to have autonomy over our own bodies. And with all this stuff that's coming in with what you're talking about here, that is very, very scary. What about other countries' involvement in what's happening here? Because again, there's a country that is in the newspaper recently, isn't there? Over here in the UK, talking about involving themselves in our government, maybe where they shouldn't be, especially with
Oh, China.
that's the one. Yeah, in London. Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, well, I'm glad you
China,
mentioned.
China.
I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned that. Karen.
Well, let me hasten to say, I mean, I
Yeah.
like all the kind words that Nicholas has for our country, but we are, in this area in particular, not yet truly a model. We're starting to ask the right questions. We're starting to espouse the right principles. But we have the same technology that's being used there in London, in different parts of our country. We're building our own smart cities and control grids. We have it here. What's important is the conversation, and it needs to be a global conversation because we're all in this. It's the same stuff being used for the same thing everywhere. Am I happy that America is perhaps starting to reopen the conversation? Yes, I am. But on the other hand, everybody can be upset that China is interfering in the operation of of your democracy, or ours. But the fact of the matter is, your country and my country has been interfering in the government all over the world for many, many years. We don't have a clean slate on that.
Very good point, Scott. Very good point. Yes, I mean, I think I just, if I may, 100% agree with Scott. If I may, and by the way, Scott, something which is extraordinarily interesting, the British had an involvement in the formation of the CIA, which has been going around the world creating color revolutions and making a mess all over the place. And the British had a formation in the Council for Foreign Relations through Chatham House in London. So Britain has had a hidden hand in this chaotic, unacceptable way the world has been run. And I think, as I say, we are, I think, at a turning point. On a different issue.
Well, you guys wrote the playbook. We just started using it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. It started here and it's got to end here. That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But in relation to what you were talking about, cancer, and I 100% accept everything that Scott has said, that, if the vaccine is properly analyzed, tested, and the facts are made open, there's nothing wrong with that. But this document relates to something which has been used to cure metastatic cancer and has been used throughout the world for years. But the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in America, terrorized people and said, if you take it, you'll die. And if you recommend it to other people, you'll be responsible for their murder. Now, I've been taking it for a long time because it has many other beneficial effects. And somebody in our office, when I was running a company, said, could they have some and give it to their mum because she has a cold and is not feeling well? And I said, well, it's 9 o'clock now. The FDA said, if I take it, I'll die. And if I recommend it to you for your mum, I'll be responsible for the death of your mum. But let's see, if I'm still alive at 1 o'clock, I'll let you have some to give to your mum. And of course, I was still alive at 1 o'clock. And that's the sort of thing. There are lots of cures for cancer which are very beneficial to people, and the information has been suppressed. And I do think the lid will come off and people will be able to take them. That's that point. The other point is going back to a certain country beginning with C and ending with A. This technology in London is compatible with this country's technology known as neurostrike, which is a technology to interfere with human consciousness through this radiation, change people's thoughts, and change humanity. Now, the World Economic Forum, and we had 3 successive prime ministers who have been advocates of the World Economic Forum: Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, and now Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer said Davos, which is the headquarters of the World Economic Forum, is much more important than London's Westminster. So that's the sort of people that we've got in our elite. Now, the World Economic Forum is interested in transhumanism, which is to change the human DNA. And if you change the human DNA, you change the resonance with an energy field. So, and Scott said, we're being put in a soup of a different energy. And if you tamper with the DNA through mRNA vaccines, you've got total control over humanity, what they think and their physiology. And that is an unacceptable thing for a democratic society, and it needs to be exposed and talked about. And the other thing is, Scott mentioned their wish, these people who are so-called elite, I call them disturbed, mentally disturbed. They want to reduce the human population because they think there are too many of us. And this technology is very effective in doing that because it's so pernicious. And
Yes.
I think this needs to be discussed, as Scott is doing, openly, so that
Yes.
people can understand that these politicians are advocating for this rollout, which is damaging humanity psychologically and physically. And it's our duty, our moral obligation, if we care about people, to make it known.
Yeah.
And that awareness will take it all down.
When I talk to people about what's going on in the world and whatever it is, and I'm not full on anymore, I drop seeds. I just, sow a few seeds, and then somebody else might say something else and sprinkle the water on, so then people start thinking for themselves and realize the world isn't as they were taught. But when you talk about whatever it is, it can be these towers, 5G, phones, Wi-Fi, things that they're spraying on us. Quite often people will say to me, that can't be true because it will affect the people that are doing it. It will affect the establishment, the elite, because they live in the same world. And they've got a point. I'm thinking, do they all live, in underground cities? Do they all have a lovely island that they go to where they're not being the water and the air and everything else isn't being tampered with? How would you answer that? Can I ask Scott first? How would you answer that?
Well, first of all, I'd admit the point that many of these broadly dispersed technologies and techniques does affect everyone it comes in touch with, including those who we call variously the elite. But you have to understand the mindset of them. They're not doing this necessarily for themselves. They may perceive that they are martyrs to a cause. They are trying to obtain an end state, perhaps in service of this notion of Gaia, a pristine world. Many of them view humanity as a virus itself on Earth, depleting resources, poisoning everything. And so I think the answer is they actually are in service of a larger goal.
And I'm going to ask you the same question, Nicholson, but also Scott, do you think, are they human? Or, do we have intervention here from creatures, entities from off the planet?
Do you want to take that one, Nicholas?
Yes. You see, I'm not worried about aliens because humanity is responsible for its condition. If there are aliens, there's nothing to do with us. We are responsible for our condition, not aliens, and not Mrs. Jones down the road. We as humanity are responsible. And I think that's a brilliant answer given by Scott. It occurs to me another factor. These politicians are often not elected. It's coming out, for example, in America that the elections have been rigged and they're effectively placemen. And the Epstein ring shows there's an intelligence network behind them because Alex Acosta, prosecuting attorney in the first Epstein trial, outed Epstein as an intelligence asset, working for the government as an intelligence asset. So that means the politicians are controlled, blackmailed, and bribed. So that is a big factor in the decisions they make. The other thing is, I think Scott is absolutely right to point out these deceptive, illusory narratives that they swallow like the net zero nonsense, when the facts show that in America over the last 100 years, the high temperatures have actually been far less than they were at the beginning of 100 years ago. So we're on a cooling curve. There might be blips, but the trend is towards cooling. So this net zero narrative is a bogus narrative, which they've sort of been conditioned to. And many politicians think it's absolutely true. I mean, for example, here in Wokingham, we have a climate emergency, but a Nobel Prize winner has just come out and said there ain't no climate emergency. It just doesn't exist. Yet you've got boroughs up and down Britain convinced they have to behave like this because of the climate emergency.
Yeah.
Now, many of those people are not bad people. They just believe it, and they think they're doing, as God said, great work for humanity because they've been deceived by an illusion of that narrative.
Apparently, if you buy some sandwiches, a sandwich packet over here, on the back it tells you what the carbon, your carbon footprint is on the back of a sandwich packet now. So all under this illusion of carbon footprint and the world's, or whatever they call global warming. They keep climate change. They keep changing it, but it's a massive, massive, massive con, isn't it? And everybody, the majority of people have fallen for it, and that's why they're getting away with all their stuff. What can we do? As I'm aware of the time now, so we've got another say 10 minutes. So what can we do as individuals? I mean, those of us that know what's going on, how, obviously by talking about it and sharing the knowledge, but is there anything else that we can do to educate other people, to bring people together? I mean, what would you say? What would you advise? What would you suggest?
Is that for Scott first? Yeah.
I touched on this last time I had the privilege of addressing an audience in the UK. One, the same people that control big pharma, that control big tech, the media, they're all the same people. These multinational corporations and their bought politicians, they're all in service of a goal by this cabal, call it that if you wish, who have very distinct aims for society throughout the world. I don't know that it is helpful to speak about aliens. Like Nick says, the aliens will show up when they do. Right now, we are the ones responsible for our planet and ourselves. And so we need to educate. And since we are all for autonomy, individual autonomy, we need to exercise it. It's fine to talk about reserving the right to liberty and personal privacy, autonomy, privacy. But you have to live it in your life. It's all about the choices that you make in your life. For one thing, maybe turn off your cell phone every once in a while. I think you'll feel a lot better if you get rid of that electronic tether. I know I do. Eliminate the amount of wireless exposure that's within your own control. Turn off the Wi-Fi router every once in a while. Maybe hardwire your computers. When external forces try to force you into things like, say, a digital ID, autonomy is all about informed consent. Well, one is I need to be informed, but two, consent means I have the right to say no. What we really need is for people to start saying no. There are studies that show that, once about 5 to 8 to 10% of the population actually gets active in their resistance. I'm not talking about armed resistance. I'm just talking about saying no. That is when the tide changes. So educate people around you, tell them how to make better informed choices, and then exercise that choice yourself and help others do the same. Reduce exposure in your own environment. Advocate for reduced exposure in public places. Advocate for more autonomy, and then expect people to exercise it responsibly.
Thanks, Scott. Nicholas.
Yes. I mean, as usual, I 100% agree with Scott. What I would say, in my own particular case, I became a local councillor. I'm chairman of my local council, and they know my thoughts on electromagnetic radiation. And they asked me to deal with pre-application letters for what they call in America cell towers, and what we call telecom masts. And we had one pre-application to our council, and I asked for the output of each 5G antenna in dBm and the drop-off calculations over distance so that it could be compliant with ICNO. What happened? They withdrew the application. So the more people who become councillors and who understand this and do that sort of thing, the more effect is going to happen. The other thing I was going to say is that human consciousness is interconnected. I mean, Scott was talking about the interconnection of the 5G, the microwave grid, but human consciousness is naturally also connected. So the more people stand up and object and say no, it's going to have a reverberative effect around the whole of human consciousness. And David Bohm, who was a marvelous quantum physicist, pointed out that quantum has no locality. In other words, what we do here in England has an effect all around the world. Likewise, what is done in America has an effect around the world. And the other thing I was going to say, I bought a Mercedes-Benz car the other day, and I discovered that this model, you can't turn off the GPS. In the other car which I had, you could switch it off. GPS is like a mobile phone inside the car, reverberating inside a Faraday cage, making the radiation very bad for the occupants. And I was astounded to discover that once you switch it off on the system, it's still working on the driver's side. There are two aspects about it. So I've now written, or going to tomorrow, write a long letter based on Dr. Martin Paul, who has illustrated 8 characteristics of this radiation that damage the human physiology. And I'm going to write and ask Mercedes-Benz to make a device that I can switch off my GPS. And I'm going to give them the facts that this radiation is very dangerous. Now, that's the sort of thing you can do. And I'll point out to Mercedes-Benz that one of their own staff has got diabetes. Now, he's a very young chap. He's only in his 20s. And the salesman who sold the car to me has also got diabetes. And diabetes is going through the roof. And this technology causes diabetes. And Mercedes-Benz have to be educated to the fact. And that's the sort of thing you can do, you see.
Yeah. It's education, isn't it?
Exactly.
I'm hoping that last comment you meant won't get this wiped off. The cause of diabetes, but let's see, because there's so much information here.
Yes, there are many causes for diabetes, but
there's many. Yes, and there's evidence. I mean, that's the thing. There's evidence for all this.
Yeah.
My hat goes off to you gents, because you are doing, you're out there doing the work, and you're saying you're going to write to Mercedes-Benz, and your parish council, and obviously Scott has been so active over there in the States doing his thing. But the majority of humanity is pretty lazy, isn't it? And that's where I think we fall down, because even though people are aware of what's going on, they've been so indoctrinated or institutionalized or whatever, or they're so lazy, they don't want to write, or they say, oh yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? But then they go and watch the TV, or they go to the supermarket, or they upgrade to the latest iPhone, and they won't stop break their habits, because they just can't be bothered. Okay, they might sign petitions, or they might go on protests. Do they help? Do you think these are of use to the cause, petitions and protests?
What I think.
Yes, they're educational. Even if when that petition lands, nothing comes of it, you have brought people together. You have also created a network, by the way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. It's bringing awareness in another way.
For those who like this modern convenience and are content to waive their privacy and their choices, my ask to them is, well, don't take my choice away too.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And oftentimes you can connect with somebody, even if they like all of this stuff, even if they believe the climate change issue, even if they think that actions are necessary. My position has always been, your rights end at my nose, because that's where my rights begin.
Yeah.
And I believe that almost anyone can recognize, because they make decisions every day, whether they know it or not. They will respect the desire of someone to exercise a bit more autonomy. And what them going along with it is, and yelling at us for not going along, functionally means is they're taking away my choice too. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to go along with that.
No, totally agree with that, Scott. And I'm sure Nicholas agrees with that as well.
Yes, I mean, 100% agree. I don't think I disagree with anything that Scott said.
That's why I said it. Yes, bless you. Oh, we
but
love Scott. We love Scott.
But I would say something. Many years ago, I met this philosopher called J. Krishnamurti, who worked very closely with David Bohm, who was an astounding quantum physicist, and he worked in turn with Sir Roger Penrose, and he is still alive, Penrose, and they're going into the tremendous advances about human consciousness. And human consciousness, although we think we're entirely separate people, Karen Dodd, Scott McColough, Nicholas Martin, all living in our silos, we're actually interconnected. And what Scott is doing in America and what other people are doing, it might not appear that it's having an effect, but it is affecting human consciousness. And the more we do it, the more effect it has. It's a resonance thing.
Yeah.
And that people are unconsciously connected with that resonance. So although it appears Mrs. Jones in 33 Acacia Drive, Neasden, has no interest in what we're saying, there is an unconscious link amongst humanity. And if humanity changes, Mrs. Jones will be drawn along with that change unconsciously.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic for our humanity.
I love your optimism, and I think it's absolutely valid. I mean, that's the 100 monkey syndrome as well, isn't it? Yeah, the 100.
Yes.
So one monkey was doing this in this side of the world, and it had that knock-on effect on a whole different part of the world. And also, like the consciousness of water. There's a lady called Veda Austin. I always talk about her because she's quite phenomenal in what she's doing. I don't know if you've come across this lady. Scott, have you heard of her yet? Or Nicholas, have you heard of her? Veda.
I've not heard of that lady. I've heard of Dr. Emoto, who is a Japanese.
Yes, that's right. She's taken it to the next level. So she's taken his work and now taken it to the next level. And she's just working with water and the fact that it has consciousness. I won't say too much about it because we're coming up to the hour. But the fact that the proof that she's got just by freezing water and coming up with these little hieroglyphs. One example I'll say quickly. So she put this little Petri dish into her freezer, a normal freezer, nothing scientific, leaves it there for 2.5 minutes. It came out with an image of her hand, like frozen, her hand, but the fingernail was broken and her fingernail wasn't. 2 hours later, her fingernail broke. And there's one of, there's so many. You can put a pip in, a seed of an apple into this Petri dish, leave it in the freezer for 2.5 minutes, it comes out, and then there's a hieroglyph of a tree. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And so this is a consciousness of water, and talk about quantum physics and the connectivity of what we are, because we are water. And it's mind-blowing what is coming, the positivity and what we're all learning. But it's education. And thank goodness we do have the internet, because we can discuss it and share this and talk to lovely people like Scott across the pond, miles away, different time, time zone. It is amazing. So Wi-Fi and all that kind of thing has a part to play. It's how you use it, isn't it? That's the thing, and who's behind it.
Just want to say, I'm not using Wi-Fi. This is for me in this house, because my wife was very damaged by Wi-Fi, and that's what woke me up. And we got rid of Wi-Fi, and she's no longer in a wheelchair. She wasn't until she put Wi-Fi in here. Then she was in a wheelchair. Now we don't have it. I'm not against technology.
Yeah,
the upload.
That's what I meant. Sorry, that is what I meant. Yes, yeah, no, absolutely, the technology. And if people have, I do have Wi-Fi in my house. I also had these things called blinks. They're like cameras for security. And so I don't have like an alarm system. They're little cameras. And then it dawned on me, I thought, crumbs, every time I turn them on or they're turned on, they are monitoring everything I do. So they've come out, they're in the bin now, because all that information, it's all part of the, what you're doing, where you're doing it, why you're doing it. It's like these smart meters and all this other stuff, isn't it? So yeah, you've got to think about what you put in your house and in your home and in your car and in your body and all that. So
yes, absolutely. I mean, there is mankind as I mean, if I'm wrong and you pay me £1 million, you get a full refund. But what I would say is that I think mankind is on not only a change of consciousness, but also a lot of hidden technology will be made available. And I've got friends who are using or colleagues, I should say, who are using Nikola Tesla technology to power motors without taking oil out of the ground or any of the other techniques to generate electricity. That technology has been known for more than 100 years, but it's been kept from humanity. And now I think it'll come out.
Yes, I don't think they can hide it anymore, because so many people are aware of it, and we know why it was taken out. It's all to do with the money, isn't it? There's also a video floating around about telekinesis. I don't know if you know about that, but there's these children in India. They're using their mind to move paper. They're just a whole bunch of kids in a classroom, and they're just sitting there with this paper on a stick, and they're looking at it, and there's no wind or anything, but the power of their mind is moving objects. So this is, it's what we are. It's not so much who we are, it's what we are capable of doing. And I think that's why it's so exciting. This period that we're going through, this ascension or whatever you want to call it, is fascinating. There is a very negative side, but we have, it's a yin yang. You have night, you have day, you have good, you have bad. And, there's the bad stuff going on, which is what we're talking about here. But there's also this amazing good stuff, which is, is going to win.
I do want to point out one thing.
Yes.
We keep talking about artificial intelligence and supreme intelligence. They have yet to figure out how to operate as fast as the chip in your brain.
Yeah.
Your brain is far more powerful than almost any computer that could ever be devised. And the things that you're talking about, maybe moving papers, I don't know how much I believe it. Okay. It may be true. I don't have that ability. But it comes from capabilities in our brains that have been evolved over time, and the essence of humanity and our own intelligence, if not repressed, will always be far superior to anything artificial.
Totally.
I can't disagree with Scott.
I can't disagree with Scott either. I love you too, Scott. We love Scott. Absolutely. You can't, and you can put chips in. You can have as many chips as you like, but it's the soul, isn't it? That's what they can't take our soul. They can't take what we are.
The best thing the British people do with their chips is eat them.
Yes, on a Friday in a newspaper. Yeah, a bit of fish. Gents, it's been an absolute delight. Is there anything you would like to say to close? Scott, would you like to say anything to end?
Only that ultimately everything we're about is maintaining health, the environment, trying to protect our children. But the main thing is autonomy. We want to protect individual choice. We want people to be able to decide how their lives will be lived so that they can rise to their own potential. And there are many who wish to take that away. What we want is for everyone who sees this video or learns about us in some other way or what we're trying to do, we want them to understand all that we are trying to do is preserve their own ability to make choices about their own lives.
Thank you. And I think we are planting seeds for future generations. That's the thing, and I think that's what is really important, because we might not see the outcome of what we're doing, but we are trying to save humanity, and for the freedom and autonomy of us. That's really important as well. So that's brilliant. Nicholas, what were you going to say?
It's difficult to follow Scott. I'm going to say something completely different. I think humanity, there was this film 2001 Space Odyssey, which is a film which I'm sure you all know, where
Yeah.
the computer HAL, the artificial computer HAL, was trying to take over symbolically humanity. Humanity won that battle. In my mind, and that's why I like this philosopher, J. Krishnamurti, who worked with Bohm and Sheldrake, who created the morphogenetic field, and all those people. There is a dimension of humanity, and I'm not talking about organized religion, you know, the churches and all that. I don't go to church, I don't accept the organized religion. But there is a dimension which is irrefutable, which has always been latent in human consciousness, which is the sacred. I don't mean going to church singing hymns and boring God to tears. I mean the actual sacred. And if humanity rekindles or allows that sacredness to operate in life and color all its human relations, it's about love for humanity, the environment, for animals, for nature. And that is part of the sacred. If that flowers in humanity, artificial intelligence will find its right place and become a tool for humanity and not the ruler of humanity. That's how I see things.
That's a really very good point to end on. It's like the Luddites, isn't it? You know, in the Industrial Revolution, you had all these machines that were being created and taking people's jobs, and they were scared, but we're using these machines to improve our life. And let's hope that AI can do that and doesn't take over, but it's a choice. It's all about a choice.
Absolutely, which is what Scott
Superb.
was saying. People need to
Yeah,
have freedom of
to
choice.
have absolutely freedom of choice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott McColough, and thank you very much, Nicholas Martin. It's been a real pleasure. So I'm going to end the recording now, and we can have a little chat afterwards. So thank you.